Okay, so top favorite were animals. Let's hear them.
Werewolf.
It's gotta
Okay,
be the
that's lame.
classic, right? No, it's
It's
the
not lame.
classic.
I
It's the
know, I know. I mean,
classic.
I'm the Master Wolves person that introduced both of you to him, and I'm telling you it's lame. No, it's not lame. I mean, the Volkudlak, the Volkudlacza, absolutely amazing, and across Europe. Were hyenas. I'm also very interested in. I don't know if the Dragon Men count because like to me like it has to be like when Anglophones discover a culture's folklore, they are like, oh, it's like a werewolf, so they put were in the front.
Mhm.
Like that's what makes it. It's like a specific, it's like an Anglo category as opposed to an actual like person, animal, shape-shifting hybrid. So I think the dragon men aren't really were dragons because they have dragon souls and are descended from the union of dragons and people, like this Maeviti. I guess someone could. I mean, if an Anglophone scholar decides to really get into Balkan folklore and decides to call them were dragons, then we're screwed. Like that's all there is to it. It's folklore is only real if it's recorded in English, you guys.
It's
Yeah,
true.
right.
It's true.
It's true.
Were crocodiles is another one
Yeah,
from New Guinea.
yeah, absolutely. Papua New Guinea. We should definitely do an episode on those because like it's one of those like B key specials is that he just comes out with these things that like he's just randomly incredibly well versed in. Um, and Papua New Guinea folklore is one of them,
Hmm.
thanks to your work.
Yeah, there are connections.
There are connections.
Without doxing myself, there are
Yeah, no kidding.
connections.
Okay, and then yeah, were jaguars also hugely from like
Hmm.
Central and Southern America. There's a lot of really good ones. I think the reason I really wanted to get into weretigers was because I was reading this book, Tracking the Weretigers, Supernatural Man-Eaters of India, China, and Southeast Asia by Patrick Newman, and it just sent me down a research rabbit hole. And I was like, okay, I feel it. The fates are aligning. My parents had Salt and I over at their house for Orthodox Easter, in which I won the egg cracking game, by the way, just so you know, my egg was the strongest. I defeated my father. Boom, boom. But we celebrate Orthodox Easter right after celebrating, non-Orthodox Easter. I don't know, like Anglican Catholic Easter, Gregorian calendar Easter. So again, Salt is really benefiting from double holidays. Us having two calendars now. But my mom was like, we should watch a movie together, and she recorded Life of Pi. And I loved that novel growing up. Like when I was in middle school, I read it and I really liked it, but I hadn't seen the movie. So we watched it, and it was great. And then I was like, you know what? We're literally doing a Weretiger episode. So I felt it coming together. And so I did some research on this, and here we are.
Hell yeah.
Oh
We
yeah, all right.
all liked the tiger story better than the one of cannibalism, so we
And then
ranked it.
Weretigers is all of both things, right? And
Mhm.
with Weretigers, you get the best of both worlds. You get tigers and you get cannibalism. So I think with that said, we'll let's cue the music and go in. Be not alarmed at the frightful howls which you may hear. It's Finger Salt and Bengal Tiger Key
Hello,
because we're
hello.
because I just like that we changed your name. It's we're not too many episodes in yet, but we're gonna find increasingly more convoluted ways to put a B in front of something.
Unhinged leaps of linguistic games and all sorts of strangeness that we're all fond of. It'll be good.
We're gonna do a word score at some point with all the things that we've done for you.
The
What do we
crossword
do when a
puzzle.
dictionary runs out?
No, well, that will be a prolific podcast indeed if we get to
Hmm.
the end. But that's when we start doing other languages that are in English. I'll
True.
pull out all the languages that I speak and we'll just go straight to it.
We could reveal the actual second letter of the B acronym and then go through that section of the dictionary as well.
That's true. That's true. Absolutely.
Never end.
We can never end. Well, you know what? We're gonna make it happen. I think with this episode specifically, I mean, it is the Bengal tiger, but for a lot of this research that I did, I got really excited to share it with you all because we're all such fans of like werewolves. And every single article, because I was obviously reading English language folklore, I wasn't looking into, other primary sources because the languages that I speak are regrettably all European. But I'm working on it. I'm working on Japanese right now. But yeah, so for the five that I'm to speak, and if I'm really, really, really feeling special, I'll pretend that, I'll like shatter like every South Slavic dialect that I can like somewhat understand, thanks to my mother tongue being, Serbo-Croatian, and just be like, oh, and I also speak this and this and this and this. I didn't quite look into the Weretiger stuff there because for the most part, we're looking at India, China, Southeast Asia, and that's really where we get most of these stories from. So I wanted to quickly note before we dive in that when it comes to non-English origin folklore, the best way to learn about this topic, if you're really passionate about it, if this isn't just like a podcast episode you're doing, but you feel really called to the tradition that you hear about, is just learn a language where this phenomenon is featured and start exploring primary and secondary sources within that language. But even better than those things is talk to people who are growing up with the folklore, right? Regardless of whether or not they're interested in magic or even if they dabble in things that we might call magic. Because it's not just that they have the linguistic access, it's that they have this cultural context, right? That is so lacking in discussions which prioritize what is immediately operatively useful in magic, right? So like when I was learning Portuguese, for example, I really made a point to make sure that I'm actually speaking Portuguese with people about regular things, about life, about what I'm eating, about, how my day was like, where what my work is like, and so on. It's not just about like narrowing into only niches of folklore and magic, because really when you talk to people who are, growing up in the culture of whatever it is that you're initiating into, or whatever it is that you're interested by, that's where you get the meat of the random interactions. Like, even though, like, let's say, like, Balkan folklore is like my main thing. Very recently, I spoke with my great aunt on the phone, and she just from like a short conversation we had about Saint Haralambos, or as we call him, Sveti Haralampie, we got into an hour of discussion about wolves, about bees, about honey magic, about ways that you can bake bread, and so on. Some things that I knew already, and some things that were completely new to me because she was telling me about her own mother and my great grandmother, and how she grew up with all these customs and she kept the calendar very faithfully, and she knew all this lore about fairies and wolves and so on, and it was just amazing. I've known her my whole life, and we've never even broached the topic as deeply as we just did, because like it's tense, right? Sometimes bringing up folklore among people who are definitely living through a history of religion not being something that was comfortable to talk about, given all the social revolutions that took place. So it's really amazing just to have like a casual conversation with her about like, what did you eat for the slava? And then it ends up being like, oh, actually, I do know some things that you're talking about, because like I'm kind of the weird one in the family for being so excited to always talk about like folklore. I usually talk to my mentors to even like broach the topic more deeply. So this is really awesome. But like that is something that, you really, it's essential. I talked to some Thai friends and some Chinese friends about some of this folklore and incorporate some of it. But like really, they were saying like they don't know much about it themselves, but like if you speak to certain people that they know, where they're from, like that's where you get the meat of the stories. Is like, but it's kind of like learning magic from a tradition. Like usually it's like, well, if you want to learn like the village wise woman's, tradition, don't come to her and be like, oh, I speak your language now, teach me magic. Like stay at her farm and learn how to milk her goats. For like a good 2 years before you even broach the topic, because like why should she teach you magic when you don't even know how to make her cheese? That's I just want to make a quick blurb, because I found myself understanding, let's say certain aspects of a folklore tradition that I've initiated into, and some that I am initiating into in the process of doing so, tremendously valuable to actually know the cultural context behind some of these terms. Like I think about like in Candomblé and Umbanda and Quimbanda, for example, like hearing things like caboclos, pretos velhos, ciganas, malandros, and so on. Like these words when you're learning it are like, oh, okay, these are classes of spirits, and I understand what they mean. And there's like a particular racialized component to, what some of these are present as categories. And then like you actually like learn more of like just the cultural context behind, the history of slavery in Brazil, for example, or like the history of indigeneity, and migration and so on and so forth, and like urban life in favelas. And you're like, oh, okay, like some of these things are making a bit more sense now.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate you bringing up the example of the conversation you had with your aunt and diving into the cultural context in that way. Because, among the three of us on the podcast, we're all currently, like you mentioned, actively learning languages of the traditions that we initiated into or are in the process of initiating into. And, take that incredibly seriously, because how else are you going to learn from the sources of these traditions who are still actively doing these things, have been doing them their entire lives, are learning from the spirits, generating new lore, evolving upon the tradition, trading sources with other speakers of the language, because as these things are written down, the perception sometimes, especially when written down in English, is that these traditions are the rigid thing that's written about in the book, when it could be two entirely different systems being done under the same name on even the same street. In the example of like Candomblé or Kimbanda or things like this.
I think that's very pertinent, as well as there's the commercial aspect as well when things get translated into English, with the way that Taoism, for example, in the West is perceived as this very individualistic practice, and then in China itself, well, it's rooted in local traditions, it's very regional. And even the Orthodox lineages, there are variations between them based on where they are. So, but when you come to the West, it's essentially, most of it's Quan Zen, really. And that's kind of a reflection of Western interests. What gets translated into English, but it's stuff that English people want to know, right? And
Yeah.
so this can color the perception as it comes across. So, yeah, I think you guys are spot on when it comes to the importance of these languages and learning them.
Yeah, and it's also just a way that you, I guess, pay a debt to the ancestors who are enabling you to even know about this, because I'm so grateful to the people who translate things into English and make it available for us. I'm not here to like be like, oh, English is bad. Like, not at all. Like, obviously,
Definitely,
like
yeah.
it's marvelous that we even get to learn about some of these things, these ways that the hard work of anthropologists and, ethnographers and so on. Absolutely, this is incredibly important. I just mean that like if this is something that you're passionate about, like this episode, for example, like I'm consulting English sources for our research, but if this is something that you're interested in, if it's like a passion for you, if this is like some of these traditions become something that you really want to learn more about and want to actually become involved in, like absolutely, if that were the case for me, for example, I would immediately find my nearest course and do it. And I really like that also that you put out about Taoism, because I think it's because of the Jesuit missionaries, we have this very sanitized kind of like view of it as something that's very like philosophical, as opposed to like a major tradition of magic and mysticism and almost like Masonic like initiatory systems in terms of like closed orders, whether it's monastic or lay, with regarding their ordinations and so on, as well as like the traditions of and streams of Taoism, without even getting into the folk stuff. So really, we'll touch on some Taoist stuff actually shortly when we look into Chinese Weretiger's. But suffice to say, I wanted to dive into the subject because a recurring theme for us on the podcast is absolutely going to be shapeshifting and animal pacts, right? Like between the three of us. We could probably do a 10 episodes on just werewolves alone.
Yeah.
Given our proximity to some of these European werewolf traditions. The pacts, the Master of the Wolves, the Gospodar Vukova, as I've introduced him to the two of you, other wolf and dog-headed beings, including our cynocephalic friends, Hermanubis, Saint Christopher, and more. Slavic, Balkan specifically, Germanic, English, the list just goes on forever. And I'm sure that we're going to have many werewolf episodes, and I definitely want to go into specific cultural instantiations of werewolves and, what are they? What is the relationship to God, to relationship to the devil, to witchcraft, and so on. We'll get into it for sure, and we'll definitely do other kinds of were animals, as it were. This is an entire genre of folklore and magic. It's very near and dear to our hearts, so it'll be a recurring motif. But we're starting off with Weretigers because I was reading this book, and that's it. And I was like, "This is cool. I'm ready." I watched Life of Pi with my partner. Let's do this. And of course, there's no room to go into all tiger myths, across this incredibly wide expanse of geographic landscapes, from, why Sun Wukong wears a tiger skin loincloth to how tiger magic is used more broadly for fertility, for attack, for protection. But you're going to see a number of recurring motifs as we explore a sample of the scholarship, especially throughout India, China, and Southeast Asia, all massive regions. So we're going to actually explore Newman's book last. That's the Tracking the Weretiger one that I started this whole thing off with, because we're going to look into some research papers and anecdotes that tackle some of the individual cultures that his book considers more broadly. And then we're going to fill it out a little bit with some of his anecdotes at the end. So the recurring motif that we're going to observe in each of these cases is the fraught but often interdependent relationships between people and tigers. So this is one of conflict, respect, distance, intimacy, and even intermarriage in some cases, transformation, initiation, and even siblinghood, as tales of people and tigers once being two tribes that live in harmony, but are now more estranged than ever before, especially in today's climate crisis, and of course, attempts to foster more conservation efforts with regards to the Bengal tiger. So, weretigers in China, I came across two articles by Charles E. Hammond. One is The Sacred Metamorphosis, the Weretiger and the Shaman, that's really considering the relationship between weretigers and shamanism in China. And he refers to, and he does something that a number of our authors do, which is immediately starting us off by saying the weretiger is essentially like a counterpart to the werewolf in Asia. And this comes across, I think, in every book that I read, just always some mention of werewolves. And I think this is a way to kind of introduce Western audiences to the topic by being like, we've all grown up with some understanding of a werewolf in our pop culture, in literature, and so on and so forth. So this, the weretiger is just as much a motif in these regions. So he specifically refers to the weretiger as the Chinese counterpart to the werewolf, both with respect to how important the tiger is in Chinese mythology, as well as those non-Han animist practices that are greatly influenced by Southeast Asian folklore. So he notes instances in which people who essentially think too much about tigers become obsessed with them and eventually are doomed to become weretigers. And I really like starting us off with this because, we're going to explore versions of people who shapeshift tigers physically, shapeshift into them spiritually, are witches whose forms, like fetches and spirit bodies are tigers, who are vampires that are tigers. But we'll go into a lot of different reasons people might become a tiger, both intentionally as well as unintentionally. But I like us starting us off with just the fact that someone becoming obsessed with tigers can be made to become one. So there's one story of a man named Yang Chen who was obsessed with tiger paintings his whole life. And this obsession led to him becoming one. And his story is pretty straightforward. He basically falls ill at the age of 90 and then destroys his paintings, these beautiful paintings of tigers that he's made. And this folktale comes to us, with this understanding that, he's about to die, he's 90 years old. And yet he still dreams, even though he's destroyed his paintings, he still dreams of becoming a tiger. And he even begins to feel that it's inevitable that he will shapeshift soon. So he asks his relatives even to say, spare any tiger that you come across in case it's secretly him. So, is he right? Is he going to become a tiger? You bet. Because as soon as he dies, his corpse, so again, this is posthumous, right? He's dead, but his corpse becomes a tiger and then runs away. And he immediately eats one of his own adult sons who follows him. So he later on appears in a dream to his family, expressing his joy. He's just elated that he succeeded at transforming into a tiger. In the afterlife, after a whole life of basically anxiously worrying, what is this going to happen? Is it not going to happen? And he also says that he's really happy that he ate a person, because this is an important part of becoming a weretiger, is this kind of cannibalism of people. And this, of course, reveals that he is actually unable to recognize that it's his own son who he ate. So his neighbor recognizes this when he hears this, and he even excuses his behavior and say, "Don't blame him for doing this. This is just how a tiger behaves in accordance to its nature." So he shouldn't be blamed for the deed because he's no longer a part of human society. And interestingly, the neighbor actually refers to the transformation in the exact same terms as one would a reincarnation.
I really like that.
Mm-hmm.
Super fond of, how in some ways archetypically vampiric this transformation is as well, which I'm sure is something we'll be getting into today. But the after death, you are no longer human, you are something else, but still kind of retaining at least parts of your human identity is
because he does talk to his family, right?
Right.
Comes in a dream, so very witchy, right? He comes to them in a dream and he tells them, "I did it. I succeeded. I became the tiger. I'm no longer a human, and I even ate my first persons," which kind of cements the initiation, as it were, posthumously. But he doesn't even realize it's his own son. So this causes tensions as to what's supposed to be done about him, because his family debates, should he be killed in punishment as a man, because like as a crime for killing his own son, or should he be left to his own devices? And should they just accept that it's maybe the same soul, but it's no longer the same identity? He is now a reincarnated tiger. He is innocently obeying his new nature. And so therefore they should just leave him be and accept that, they can't hold him accountable in the way that, you would a human who's just done this. However, at the same time, they're considering, is this something where they should obey the requests that he gave them when he was still a man? Like his last request while he was a human was to leave all tigers he come across unharmed, in case one might be him. That's just literally happened. So they debate over this, and eventually filial piety wins. He's left unharmed because they say, this is still, dad, this is still grandpa. We should just leave him be. And interestingly, in a similar legend, a man's mother, who's a weretiger, ends up dying of the wounds that she incurs in her tiger state. And her son buries the tiger body itself. Because she doesn't change back, he buries her physical tiger body with all the same rites that you would give a mother. Again, demonstrating this enduring filial relation between families and their weretiger relatives, even if, the weretiger relative has in some way done you wrong in any way. You basically, there's still a filial connection. So it's still recognized as the same soul, even if you're understanding it as a kind of reincarnation or as a temporary shape-shifting experience.
I think it's a quite interesting contrast to some of the animal witchcraft beliefs that you'll find in northern China, from Shandong to the Dongbei regions, where you'll find animal spirits like Hu Huang or Xian taking the shape of people, even becoming ancestors themselves as outsiders coming into the family. And so it's a bit of a reversal of this process, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
And on one hand, you have someone becoming an animal yet retaining their humanity and ancestral ties. On the other hand, you have an animal becoming human and thus attaining humanity, or in these cases, immortality, and establishing new familial ties. The latter, and probably the former as well, can be a bit of a taboo subject in China, but I do find the contrast quite interesting here. Do we have examples that are a reversal of this in Weretiger law?
Oh, absolutely. There's actually quite a lot of Malaysian stories that we're going to look into coming up of tigers becoming people as opposed to the other way around. So I'm glad you flagged that.
Wonderful.
So we'll get into it soon. So interestingly, transformation to a tiger can be done deliberately. In the past example, it's someone who wanted to become one and just became obsessed with them and then eventually became one posthumously. We have an example of a mother who can change at will. So you can induce tiger transformations by wearing its pelt. And sometimes this alone is sufficient. And at other times, the skin of the tiger must be possessed by a spirit that's going to use the pelt as its vessel. And then this is the being, this spirit is the agent that carries out the transformation, which I think is a really interesting parallel with the tiger skin being the possessing agent with that of other kinds of were animals that get possessed by the skin. Just bringing it back to my home, in Serbia and Montenegro and Croatia and Bulgaria, Bosnia, all these places in the Balkans, you often hear of a werewolf having a wolf skin that is the vessel or the seat of a spirit that then possesses their spirit body. So when they're asleep or when they're forced to come out, during certain feast days and so on to hunt, that's what's really causing the transformation. It's a spirit that lives in the pelt, usually in a basket under their bed, that will come out and force them out. And interestingly, in a number of medical and magical Chinese texts, tiger skin is supposed to cure diseases like malaria because it functions like a talisman. And specifically, it like the skin itself literally frightens the spirits of disease away as like an exorcism. So you don't even have to do much with it. Like it's just that the skin itself carries this property.
Reminds me a lot of talismans for protection from all sorts of harm throughout the region as well that you'll see etched or written onto scrolls of tiger skin and carried on the person.
Yeah, like the tiger skin yants, or in the case of it's a tip of my tongue.
Like a tiger skin takrut.
Yeah, takrut, that's the one I was thinking about. Yeah. It's the rolled up, because they could be little lead ones, right, or copper, but like specifically I've seen ones on tiger skin. Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, there's also examples in which the transformation is not a reincarnation, right? It's more like a phase that a person can slip in and out of. So just one example of like a monk putting on a tiger skin in China as a practical joke. And then people are watching him and they're so convinced that he's transformed just because he's wearing this, they run away in terror. And then when he tries to tell them, hey guys, it's just a joke, like come back, he realizes he can't actually take the skin off. And he has indeed fully shapeshifted. So it was just a prank, bro, but he was indeed a tiger now. And so he accepts
accidental initiation.
Yeah, literally, this is often the case. So he accepts his fate. He spends a year as a tiger, and he serves ghosts and gods essentially as part of the food chain. He eats those they designate. He essentially becomes like an assassin for them, but his mind is still human. And he only kills a person out of dire need. And so it is at this point when he nearly eats a fellow monk that he fully understands the error of his ways. He cries out mournfully, and finally the tiger skin slips off of him, allowing him to be a man again. And his teacher later on tells him that this shows both the ease of slipping into evil ways, as well as that of turning over a new leaf, being that a single thought can cause either damnation or salvation. So this is kind of interesting, right? He's like essentially he's trying to tell him, it's you can easily turn evil, but you can also easily abandon it. And you can essentially change who you are instantly. And interestingly, this does not actually address that he was literally in service of ghosts and gods during his 10 years as a tiger, something which Hammond, the author, points out as revealing that instead of reincarnation, this is a case study of like the karma of a tiger versus that of a human being different, right? As well as their dharma, right? So it's like, what is their action and what is their duty? Because as he's a tiger, even though his teacher tells him, oh, it's like because you had evil thoughts. I mean, it's not that he was literally associated with evil, but it's just more that he's saying that, the joke that he played, it's evil thoughts are like that. It's as simple as that, but at the same time, he does have a duty when he's a tiger. It may have been a tragic period for him, but he was still employed by ghosts and gods alike. One really interesting example that is much like this is that of a Nanyang scholar whose transformation was literally imposed by the will of heaven. So this is a slightly longer story. I'm going to give you a brief summary. Basically, a scholar is staying at the Nanyang Mountains and he falls ill with a fever. 10 days pass and he is still not recovered. He goes out into the courtyard to get some fresh air and there's a knock on the door that no one but himself hears. He opens the door and outside is a person who says,
"You must change into a tiger. Here are your orders."
Why are we doing the Deckard Cain voice again?
I don't know. Just wandering old man delivering the mandates of heaven. Would be fitting.
For those who don't know, that was Deckard Cain from Diablo 2 and 3. I always play Druid in Diablo 2, so it's definitely I like to change into the wolf or the bear.
It's appropriate for this episode.
It is. So you know what, Deckard Cain is appropriate. So without thinking, the monk, or the scholar rather, he stretches out his hands to receive the messenger, but he realizes the hands are paws. So after the tiger-handed messenger leaves the letter, the scholar opens it and sees it's only a row of seals. So the scholar eventually falls asleep and he finds that the letter is still there, which he thought was even stranger because he thought this was all a dream. But his fever is finally cured, so he goes out for a stroll with none of his children accompanying him. And all of a sudden, as he comes before a brook, he sees his reflection in the water and he notices he's already a tiger. So he fears for the worst. He realizes that, if he went back home, he would frighten his wife and children, so he runs into the mountains in shame. Now, his family obviously misses him very dearly, and as days pass and he doesn't return, they worry the worst that, he was eaten by wolves or even a tiger himself, and they mourn his loss. Meanwhile, our protagonist learns to eat mud, hunt rabbits, climb trees, and embraces new nature. At one point, he even sees a woman picking mulberry leaves, and he remembers hearing once that tigers actually eat people. And so he decides to catch and eat her. And after he does this, he finds her incredibly delicious, far more than the mud and the rabbits, which I'm sure is probably true, morbidly so. And so he then sets off to find more humans to devour. And he comes across some travelers and a woodcutter. And just as he's about to pounce, he hears a voice from behind him, which yells at him,
Don't take him. Don't take him.
which to this scholar's surprise turns out to be from a spirit. And the spirit has white eyebrows and whiskers, and he appears as an old man. And suddenly he remembers how he came to be where he is. And he tells the spirit his sad tale of, what happened with the tiger pawed messenger, his fever, how he transformed, and now how he's run away from his family. And after he listens to the story, the ghostly old man replies,
People like you are transformed at the behest of envoys of the spirits of heaven. For you, it will end now, and you will return to your human form. However, if you kill the woodcutter, you will never change. Tomorrow you must eat a certain case reviewer wang, and then you must change back into a person.
So having heard this, the spirit vanishes. And the rest of the story involves a scholar deciding to track down this case reviewer in order to change back into a human. So he does indeed find case reviewer Wang. He kills him, and he transforms back into a man after having eaten his flesh. He sluggishly makes his way back into the mountains to his home, to the joy and astonishment of his household, who has not seen him for 8 months, so that's how long he was a tiger. His speech was muddled like a drunk's, but gradually he was able to eat gruel, and in a little over a month he was back to normal and able to fully speak. So 5 or 6 years later, the scholar was traveling and ended up attending a banquet held by a district magistrate. The host was talking about people who change into animals and saying how these stories are clearly absurd, like no one can physically shapeshift. And then the scholar tells his own story, explaining how it's actually not preposterous at all. And, he gives the whole account of everything that happened to him. So the host, shocked and bewildered, turned out to be case reviewer Wang's son. And he revealed that his father was killed by a tiger. And he's like, I've met my enemy, it's you're the six-fingered man, and he ends up killing our protagonist. And the other officials present actually pardon him immediately, given the nature of the crime, and they're like, it's understandable. So what I found striking about the story, which I think is just great, is the complete absence of free will, right? So the scholar is transformed basically, possibly in order to kill case reviewer Wang, even though he kills the mulberry picking woman along the way while coming to terms with his newfound hunger. And since this is not his fault, he feels comfortable disclosing what happened to his host, right, the magistrate, because he's like, well, that was the way of the tiger. That's what I was asked to do by the spirits. That was the will of heaven. And of course, he's immediately killed in retaliation by the reviewer's son. And the son is pardoned as well, inevitably given the injustice of his father's death in his own eyes. So he's doing his filial duty to kill his father's killer, even though this was the will of heaven, unbeknownst to him. So I just found this story absolutely remarkable. Other stories link tigers to divinity even more directly, not just as their messengers, but as those who pray to gods themselves and seek guidance from them. So we have biographies of Buddhist monks living in harmony with nature that often depict them as living alongside tigers or even raising them in China as a way to demonstrate their power over such a fearsome beast. There are even legends of monks using the Diamond Sutra to subjugate tigers or even convert them to Buddhism themselves. Oftentimes, this will even apply to weretigers themselves, such as in one legend in which a weretiger who was transformed against his will by having a pelt thrown over him. So, imagine pranking someone by just throwing a tiger pelt like a rug on someone. They just instantly become a tiger, and you're like, oh shit! So he's forced to stay at a monastery where a monk raises him until he finally loses his fur and becomes human again. But as soon as he steps out of the temple, the same spirit which threw it on him, it flings the tiger skin over him again. And he's basically forced to live the rest of his life in the temple as a servant, because every time he leaves the temple, the same spirit just punks him with this. So basically he's forced to become, this is a funny initiation, right? This is how you become a monastic. That's all you have. Some people choose the way of the monastic, and some have it thrust upon them, to misquote a bit of Shakespeare.
I like the idea as not only can it be a blessing and also the direct will of heaven, but it's also a curse in some ways to be turned into one of these things, which I think is a point that's often overlooked in the world over with a lot of the animal pacted folklore. Sometimes people just are forced to become these things.
Yeah, exactly.
You just suddenly are the servant of that deity for the next 7 years of your life.
Yeah.
And stumble out of the woods, eating dirt after the fact, in the case of the one guy as well.
Yeah, I mean, that happens with the Master Wolves, right? Sometimes people are forced to become the Master Wolves. But I'm getting ahead of myself because we'll do episodes on him later, I'm sure.
Mhm.
So many data stories in this article also include cases of Taoists and shamans as masters of were-tigers, or as were-tigers themselves. So in one case, actually, a Taoist master's secret identity turns out to be none other than the King of Tigers himself, Joe Exotic. so,
It's Tiger King. It's taking me back.
I know way back to the beginning of the pandemic. I wanted to. There's like 10 Joe Exotic memes I want to make, but I'll restrain myself. Some were-tigers even work as shamans themselves because they exercise destined deaths and prevent them from happening through decoys. And others, do this as well just through scaring them. Like it's kind of like the pelt itself scaring away the malaria, right? But throughout each, the recurring motif of these stories is a kind of inescapability of fate, with some exceptions, like some restrictions apply. So, for example, in one version, a Taoist were-tiger is sentenced to eat 1,000 victims as punishment for an offense that he made against the Lord on High, Shangdi, one short of his quota, so he's at 999 victims. He asks that his final victim makes a scapegoat out of like a bundle, like literally like a decoy, and he devours this bundle, and he's finally free. It counts. He was able to fool the spirits. And another, a man who was the final victim of a similar were-tiger, manages to steal the pelt before he transforms. So, acknowledging that he was outplayed, the were-tiger offers to let him go free. And as he walks outside, the tiger is struck down and killed by a lightning bolt. So essentially, like the gist of this story, right, is that there's a were-tiger who has to eat a certain number of people to satisfy a quota, and his final victim outplays him by stealing his pelt, right? And then he's like, okay, yeah, fair play. You go free. I'll find a different victim. And then he's immediately killed. So it seems that like heaven is unhappy with the were-tiger's resistance to their mandate, even if the mandate involves devouring other people. So ultimately, Hammond concludes that to be transformed to a were-tiger is often a kind of religious experience, an initiation that is often non-consensual and shamanic in nature, as many shamanic initiations, as well as witchcraft initiations, are entirely non-consensual. And that were-tigers, he seems to suggest that they are essentially shamans, right? A claim that we can contest given the problematic category of shaman academically, but nevertheless, it's an interesting thesis because he further complicates this in another article about female tigers and shamanism and witchcraft. And this piece is called "The Demonization of the Other: Women and Minorities as the Were-Tiger." I really like that he considered the woman as were-tiger trope as indicative of male dread of female sexual appetites, as well as how foreigners and ethnic minorities were demonized through literary depictions of were-tigers throughout medieval China. So he opens up by noting that a lot of the more classical Chinese textual references of were-tigers were collected by literate historians who both sought to preserve popular oral folklore, but also at times embellished them and appended their own explanations, which of course consist of their own beliefs and attitudes of the phenomena. So at the same time, it is popular beliefs themselves whose prejudices influence the scholars textualizing this lore, right? As much as they unconsciously impose their own elitist attitudes to it, they're also preserving popular beliefs which include their own, misogynistic understandings of women's place in society. So he's considering how transformation from men into tigers are typically blamed in classical Chinese texts on like disease, on curses, on violating taboos. So, like one of the earliest and most famous legends is that of Kung Nia Ai from the loose state of Confucius, who changes into a tiger and eats his brother. And similar stories of cannibalism involve fathers devouring their children, and Saturnian onslaughts like we saw earlier. The point of view the text takes is typically a sympathetic one, seeking to excuse the transgression and understand the culprit. Kind of like we saw earlier, right? Is like the 90-year-old man who died and became a were-tiger. He ate his son. They excused it because of filial piety, right? So it's kind of understood like, okay, he's a tiger. Tigers don't really know any better. This is his new nature. This is his reincarnation, right? But this is really not the case when it comes to female were-tigers, who are almost always killed in punishment. So we have a few examples of Tang Dynasty texts that involve were-tigresses, or were-tigresses, I suppose. And so the first one is that of the Chen Shou assistant clerk.
In the Shang'an period of the Tang, an assistant clerk in Shenzhou became a tiger because he fell ill. He was about to eat his sister-in-law, but the villagers caught him and found he was the assistant clerk. He had not yet completely changed, but he actually sported a tiger's tail. So they tied him to a tree for several days. He changed back into a person. The aide, Sui Xian, saw it himself and asked him about it.
The assistant clerk said, "At first, I was led by a tiger to a woman dressed in beautiful clothes. Many tigers were in attendance. Each was responsible for a particular day's food. At the time, I'd just become a tiger, and my body had not completely changed, so I could not seek anyone else, and was about to offer my sister-in-law. Although I've been unable to become a tiger, I can still make the sound."
Xian ordered him to try it out, and the assistant clerk then roared like a tiger, shaking everything and making roof tiles fall.
I really like that in this case, he only has a tail as the Weretiger feature. And Hammond notes that, women in this story are twice the chosen victims. First, he is led to eat a woman as part of his initiation. And secondly, he has to find his own victim to offer up, and he, happens upon his sister-in-law as an easy catch. So there's an additional taboo being violated here, right? Which is not just cannibalism, but the sexual connotations of it being his sister-in-law directly going against Confucian family mores. There's another really good story that I'll have Salt read for us again, which is that of Huang Xian.
At the end of the Liang dynasty, Huang Xian from Xie the younger sister, Xiao Xu, she was married to Li Su from the same district. Once she went to the mountains together with her sister-in-law to pick fruit. When they reached the god's temple, Xiao Xu loved it and was almost unwilling to leave. On the way back, she returned, entering the temple alone. When she saw someone, she hid in the grass. Xian's wife told Su, who she thought was being unfaithful. He was summoned by the district office, and when he returned with a companion, they ran into a rainstorm, and seeing a fire built in the temple, they entered to dry their clothes. They saw clothing on the god's throne, and in a little while heard the sound of steps outside. The two of them were frightened, so they hid on the other side of the screen behind the god's throne. Shortly afterwards, they saw a tiger rush in, twitching its tail. When a tiger reached the side of the fire, it removed its teeth and claws and rolled up the skin, putting it on the throne. As she put on her clothes and sat facing the fire, Su saw that it was Xiao Xu, and Su came out and embraced her, but she did not respond. The next day they returned, and he brought her to Xian's house, where they locked her in a room. When they threw her raw flesh, she ate it. They always kept her under guard. In a few days, she changed into a tiger, and the government investigated. The villagers then came to the house with weapons and shot into her room, killing her. The next day, there were tiger killings, and the people had to keep their gates shut even in the daytime. The magistrate, Xiang Xi, wrote a memorial.
This was really sad, and I think it's interesting to note here that Xiao Shu is presumably drawn to the temple because that's where the tiger spirit that possesses her lies, and she treats it like a throne, right? It's like as if she belongs to it. Hammond even notes that her impulse to hide is really more like a tiger seeking cover, though it makes her husband suspect that it's because she's being unfaithful. So she was essentially initiated into some kind of trance, possibly a shamanic one, by the shrine, becomes one with the tiger spirit, and even though she's killed for it, presumably because her transformation carries connotations of rebellion and foreignness through her, behavior of eating raw meat and so on, which is definitely not a Han custom. Other tigers attempt to avenge her through their attacks on the locals soon after because they accepted her as one of their own. And the final anecdote that I wanted us to read is that of Cu Tao, which is this one is just absolutely great. So here we go.
Cui Tao was from Puzhou. Traveling in Chuzhou, he got as far south as Liang. In the morning, he set out from Chuzhou and arrived at the Inn of Benevolence and Righteousness. He wanted to stay at the inn, but the steward said, "This inn is haunted, you best not stay." Tao would not listen, but carrying his book bag, entered the hall. The steward brought him a lamp and candle on the second watch. Tao just unfolded his quilt to go sleep. When suddenly at the door to the inn, he saw a large foot like an animal's. A tiger burst through the door. Tao fled in fear, hiding in a dark place to watch it. The animal removed its skin in the muddle of the courtyard, revealing a strikingly beautiful and dignified woman. She came up into the hall and approached Tao's quilt. He came out and asked her,
"What are you doing, sleeping in my quilt? Why did I just now see you come in, dressed up as an animal?"
The girl rose and said to Tao,
"Please don't think it strange. My father and older brothers are hunters. Our family is poor, and I wanted to find a good husband. There was no way for me to do it on my own, So at night I secretly put on the tiger skin. I knew that the gentleman stayed at this inn, and so I wanted to entrust myself to one to serve as his wife. Up until now, the guests and the travelers have all been frightened to death. Tonight I've been fortunate to meet such a person as you, and I'm willing for you to verify this.
Tal said.
If it's really as you say, I want to accept the happiness and love you offer.
The next day, he took the tiger skin and threw it in a dried up well behind the hall and left, taking the girl with him. Afterwards, Tao passed the Mingxing exam and was sent to Xuanxiang. When he went to take up his post, Tao, his wife, and son travelled together. After a month, they came to the Inn of Benevolence and Righteousness, and Tao laughed.
This is the place where I met you for the first time.
He went to look to the well, and the animal skin was still there. He laughed again.
The skin you used is still here.
His wife said.
Have someone take it out.
When she got it, she laughingly said to Tao.
Let me try it on.
She then came down the steps of the hall, and when she had put on the skin, changed into a tiger, prancing and roaring, bounding up the hall, it ate the boy and Tao and left.
Here, even though Tao passes both his civil service examination and his wife's own tests, as he's too scared to marry her, he ends up doing so. He ultimately gets devoured when she puts on the skin. Perhaps, Hammond says it might be because it was a joke, like just to scare him, but then she's overtaken by her urges as a beast, and she rejects not only her position as his subordinate, as a woman, as a wife, but also as a mother, and devours her, their only son. Other stories involve many of these motifs. The woman being rejected as an other, outside the social caste of her husband, being a flesh eater, a blood drinker. There's some stories of female weretigers who drink the blood of their husband's maids and devour his concubines, displaying very un-Confucian characteristics such as being jealous, anti-conformist, dominant over their husbands, both in terms of physical and sexual power. One more positive story, actually, linking tigers to the vengeance of wronged women, comes to us from a Ming anthology. There's a beautiful woman who lives alone. She's a widow, and she refuses a man's advances. And the man takes this really, really well and is completely humiliated and tries to frame her for theft. And a tiger immediately carries him off and devours him in response to her prayers for vindication. So here, the tiger is an envoy of heaven, assuming we don't construe the story as the woman being a sorceress who's controlling the tiger. Some other anecdotes that Hammond shares involves the contested identity of the female weretiger. So one example is a woman involuntarily shapeshifting into a tiger because she saw other tigers in the distance, and she immediately fell into like an immense trance, becoming enraged and joining them. Which is interesting because tigers are notoriously solitary. So Hammond surmises that they are also a metaphor for a foreign or an enemy tribe that she's joining. Another is of a woman who is persuaded to return to human form, being healed of her weretiger transformation by her husband and her son, who essentially bring her back to patriarchal civilization, as he says, from her bouts of rebelling against her social role. And Hammond actually reminds us that husband and son are both the most important male figures in a woman's life, hence why he gives us this kind of feminist reading of the story. Ultimately, he concludes that, well, even though the legends present Han men who change into man-eating tigers, at times fulfilling heaven's will, or even as powerful shamans, women are not so lucky. They're typically framed as having an inherently antisocial, less than human nature with an innate ferocity, something that he ultimately, he thinks that is a projection of male insecurity over women's sexual control and prowess, and therefore a demonization to keep the female figures subjugated and subservient to patriarchal ends. So that's kind of his feminist reading of these texts.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a recurring theme in the works of Chinese literati in general. If you read the works of Pu Songling, for example, there's a lot of projection going on in these texts, which are always, there's fascinating stories, but they tend to project both fears and fantasy onto their depictions of women, especially spirits in the shape of women, whether that's tigers, ghosts, foxes, who are always depicted as dangerous, seductive, and similar qualities like that. It's definitely a trend in these works.
Mm-hmm. Before we move on to our next section, I just wanted to thank you for your help with pronunciation. I know you're learning Cantonese, so it's been it's great. I know these stories don't include tones, so it's not always clear, how everything is pronounced. But I appreciate you giving us some pointers, Salt.
It is also Wade Giles, a lot of it, so
Yeah.
which is not something I'm familiar with, but that's okay.
It's okay. I'm gonna, I'm sure it's better than nothing,
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
So our next section is Malaysia. Peter Boomgaard wrote an excellent book on tigers in Malaysia called Frontiers of Fear: Tigers and the People in the Malay World, 1600 to 1950. And for this podcast, I'm mostly looking at chapter 9, Devouring the Hearts of People, the Weretiger. Here he tells us that our first textual source of weretigers in the Malay world comes from an early 15th century Chinese account, actually, of Malacca, in which the Chinese visitors observed that here the tigers turn into men, enter the markets, mix with the people, and are captured and killed if they're recognized by their true identities. So we have this example, Salt, you were asking about this earlier, right? Instead of people becoming tigers, falling prey to their instincts and entering their world within nature, here the identity of the weretiger is the other way around. It is the beast which becomes man, adopts his customs and mannerisms, and even blends into the urban and commercial spheres of the market, right? Like we're literally entering the sphere of man.
They walk among us.
They do indeed. By the 1800s, we actually see that conversion to Islam did not stomp out these beliefs in were-tigers. So one source coming to us from John Newbold, writing in the 1830s, says that many Malaysians informed him of the process known as jadi-jadian, the ability or the curse of some men to transform into tigers voluntarily or involuntarily at night, returning to human form during the day. 60 years later, we have British civil servants noting that much weretiger lore has come to primarily refer to foreigners from other tribes as weretigers, as well as traders and travelers. So some stories specifically reference textile trading and merchant hajis, so those are people who had made their Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca, as weretigers, even though they are supposedly fairly Orthodox Muslims. And those regarded as having a significant holy power, regardless of the actual religion of origin, were often a target for accusations of being a weretiger.
I wonder if this was a popular suspicion towards foreigners or something promoted by local religious authorities in response to perceived competition.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, in this particular chapter, we're introduced to the idea that any person harboring a kind of holy power, regardless of religion, could be able to transform into a weretiger. But we also see weretigers as tigers themselves who can sometimes be ciphers or metaphors for foreigners, right? And traders and merchants, right? These people making the Hajj, like these are people who are transient in some ways, right? Like they're liminal, they're moving, they're not necessarily anchored to a particular village. So I think that also gives us another layer as to why they are sometimes accused of being tigers.
Very true, very true.
It makes me think a bit about the Germanic and Scandinavian wolf lore that we mentioned at kind of the outset of this episode, where people who were othered in society, be they, itinerant, so they're coming in from who knows where with whatever agenda they may have, or are, criminals, often thieves or murderers, will be referred to by the, vilified were animal in the area. So in, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, you're finding people being called wolves for this. So here, much the same case as tigers.
Yeah, absolutely. And around the early 1900s, attention from Western ethnographers of Malay culture shifted away from these involuntary market-dwelling were-tigers to more shamans who had tiger familiars and who were not only spirit tigers, but also the spirits of their ancestor shamans. So essentially, these are spirits that are their original, let's say, lineage keeper who could turn into a tiger, who is now the tiger spirit that is able to help his present student become a tiger himself. And these were often inherited patrilineally through their families, meaning that their ability to turn into a tiger was granted by the familiar, who is himself the ancestralized spirit of a were-tiger shaman from their own bloodline or from their initiator and mentor's ancestry. So you can see kind of like the lineage progression of your familiar is your ancestor, who is also a tiger. Yeah, I love it too. It's phenomenal. There's actually a great account of one such shaman from the Cambridge expedition, which took place in 1899 to 1900. So a shaman told one of the participants of the expedition that he could turn into a tiger at will, and he would feast upon the bodies, dead or alive, of his victims, except for the heads, which he would not eat but rather bury, which is kind of an interesting parallel to some of like the headhunting folklore that you and I've studied, Key. in terms of like, the head is not eaten, it's kept or displayed or it's buried. And if he wanted to become a tiger, and this is like my favorite part of this entire episode, by the way, if he wanted to become a tiger, he would just say, I am going to take a walk. And then he would go to the hills. He would go to the hills, burn incense, collect the smoke in his fist, and blow through it, right? And then he would squat on his haunches, lean forward on his hands, and shake his head quickly left to right. And then the skin would change, his fur would grow, a tail would appear, and he would remain as a tiger from 7 to 12 days, during which time he would spend raiding the neighboring cattle pens until his craving was at last appeased. And then he would return to the same spot where he shapeshifted from, and he would just say, I'm going home, and shapeshift back. I love this.
That's so cool.
I know, it's so based. Like, I just love the idea of like, I'm going for a walk. And then like, boom, you do this whole ritual and then go. And interestingly, in addition to beliefs of were tigers as shamans or, as tiger spirits as familiars or shamans who possess these familiars, making them act like tigers during this possession, and then even potentially physically changing their shape. There's actually one other belief that comes from Malaysia that's especially among the people of Selangor, which is that in the jungles, there's actually a society of tiger folk. They have their own towns, houses, markets, mirror copies of human society, and yet their structures, so their houses, their stalls, their architecture, they're made of human hair, bones, and hides. So they collect these when they are struck by these ferocious battle trances in which they feel compelled out of nowhere to go out and hunt their human victims. And they bring back the bodies and they use them to make furniture, essentially, and houses, which is super freaking cool. I'm obsessed with that.
Dark-sided Ghibli movie.
Yeah, absolutely. There's actually many purported locations where these tiger villages may be, and how the tiger folks are, tigers by night and humans by day. So this is another example of tigers becoming people as opposed to the other way around. And my favorite out of all the locations that's listed in this chapter of a potential place for tiger village is the Dempo volcano. And it's said that some of these tigers went into local villages and markets and would even take human women as their mates, making them, at least in spirit form, as a kind of spirit lover or a spirit marriage candidate. But I really like this because it's this recurring motif in folklore that spirits have their own societies. They have their own places that mirror ours. Jinn, fairies, dragons. Even they have castles, palaces, universities, markets. And their societies mirror ours. So interestingly, in areas in Sumatra where were-tiger beliefs were the most prominent, it's also the places that have plenty of prehistoric tiger megaliths, far predating the Karen-C people's migrations into the area. So beliefs on were-tigers from Java were hugely collected in the 1800s, during which many of the people publishing these papers were attempting to categorize and collect the general themes in order to understand these particular motifs, right? So here are some of the most important elements from Boomgaard's book, quoting these papers from the 1800s, and specifically the ones that I found the most interesting. So first, we have that were-tigers are always royal tigers. They are not leopards or other kinds of cats. They are not tigers that turn into people. Rather, they are people who turn into tigers. So this is specifically in Java, right? We were just looking at tigers that become people. Here in Java, we have people that turn into tigers. The reason they can shapeshift is because they have special knowledge passed on to them from their families, especially from parent to child, right? Like those shamanic initiations we talked about. Methods include turning people's clothes inside out, or setting incantations, sometimes just doing 3 somersaults while holding their breath. Fasting should, yeah, absolutely. But you should fast before you do this, which I'm sure will make you very dizzy. And it's generally done at night, though it can be done during the day in some cases. If someone steals the inside-out clothes of the were-tiger while he's a tiger, he may never be able to come back into his human form. So similar motifs, I think here we can think about like spirit lovers or fairy lovers, whose skin or feathers, dragon lovers, it's these skins that anchor them into their form and their shapeshifting ability. And if it's burned or stolen, it can risk their ability to change back. So in human shape, were-tigers can be recognized by the absence of a vertical groove in the upper lip, a lack of heels, having crooked feet, and that they will not look at people when spoken to, keeping their head down.
It's always the feet, isn't it?
Yeah, it always is. Wherever you go, there's something about the feet. And I like that too, because in a lot of folklore, a lover, spirit lover or spirits in general, when they come and take their human forms, it's the feet that remain animal, or, of the original form. It's like the feet that will still be a swan, or will be like serpent, coils, or will be like a chicken, or even like dragon feet. Because when they touch the ground, that's where they're truer than it is exposed. So a lot of these spirits are said to like have elaborate shoes or wear long robes to hide their feet. So it's much as with people who are also witches or are non-human spirits in human bodies, it's the feet are a giveaway. So during the daytime, weretigers are typically wage laborers, merchants, or beggars, and they can sometimes marry humans. Both the women and men can be weretigers, but although mostly in the text they are male. And sometimes they are hunted down by people who discover them and who want to take the law into their own hands. And finally, some weretigers become tigers fully after their deaths, kind of like in that first example we gave, and they become the ancestral familiar spirit for the next generation of their family. There are actually fewer textual sources coming from European anthropology in the Bali regions compared to others we have seen already. So W.J.M. Plate collected a lot of these stories in the early 1900s, and he gives us a lot of really interesting tidbits on the possibility of like covens of selaks. And these are vampire witches who could fly, suck the blood of living people, eat corpses, shapeshift into various forms and animals, such as including an invisible light-emitting ghost or shadow state, presumably an out-of-body spirit flight experience where they become these misty hazes and shadows.
It reminds me of certain other vampiric spirits that project in various animal forms, but also notably as orbs of light.
Yeah, exactly. And also, speaking of fun with orbs, they have orgies in which they all sleep with each other. Yeah. It's just like imagine like 16 balls of light just rubbing against each other. But in this case, as in these spirit forms. And people would often try to figure out who among them was one of these and then try and murder them, much as in the case of these Weretiger accounts, right, where they're poached essentially. So these are more general witches and vampires as animal shapeshifters, because they often become hazy, shadowy forms when out to hunt people, but the tiger is one of their main animal forms. In Patrick Newman's book, the one that started this whole journey for me, there's actually a great example of how, while you have physical shapeshifting in one aspect, right? But there's another which is spiritual shapeshifting, such as a Batek shaman, for example, sending his shadow soul deep into the forest to wake and enter into a special tiger body, which was given to him by an ancestor. And he uses his tiger body to patrol and eavesdrop on the village. So I really like this idea that it's not just physical shapeshifting, it's also possessing animals, like letting your spirit come out and enter an animal body and possess it and use it to wander around. One interesting distinction that he draws between becoming a tiger and simply obtaining its properties or being possessed or empowered by a tiger's spirit is the environment and social context in which all this takes place. So, for example, if a shaman practices his tiger magic in a hut built for this purpose, everything is controlled and bounded within this kind of civilized environment, right? So this results in him entering a trance and behaving like a tiger in possession. But that's where it stops. It's essentially it's a performance within the body. It's a kind of possession where it's still the human body that is the site of this behavior. And this is the same as masters of the Malay martial arts silat, especially the tiger form of silat, which is harimau, which mimics the movement of tigers. Some masters even invite the spirits of their dead ancestors in the form of weretigers to possess them, and are understood as even potentially physically shapeshifting into weretigers mid-fight because of this. However, when the witch or the selak invokes the same forces in this kind of like unbounded, uncontrolled, uncivilized environment, such as deep in the forest at night, these same forces are now unconstrained and they may result in a physical transformation. So one of the ways to snap a selak out of their transformation is to call out their true name, which will bind them and force them back into human form, which is a pretty typical technique. But I like this distinction between the person who becomes possessed by the tiger but remains in a human shape, it's a spirit possession, versus those that are kind of like unbounded by civilization and physically can transform.
Yeah, super interesting notions of, the witch's spirit flight. Are they leaving their body as the soul that is then taking the form of that animal and being like a spiritual force, or is the soul grabbing one of those, the physical animal that's just out in the world, and piloting it around as if it's a drone of sorts? Or are they themselves in whole or in part, as we'll probably get to later, becoming physically the animal and going about its business? And the answer is, all three.
Yeah, drones, Tiger Gundams.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I think it's worth noting here, you just reminded me, the clouded leopard is actually more common in Borneo, while the tiger is not, because, the tiger does not historically inhabit that island, but tigers still play a major role in the folklore of the region. So, like skins, skulls, teeth, and images of tigers were really important amulets, and male aristocrats were identified with tigers for their power and prominence. So, here we have this association of, the spirit body or like the spiritual properties of an animal that's not even popular there because of the folklore becoming still associated with these really important positions of power.
Mm.
So ultimately, Boomgard concludes with a reiteration of the Weretiger shaman kind of connection, the summary of the general differences between these regions, and a reminder of the relatively marginal social position of Weretigers in these stories. Like they're never the average field or farm working peasants, right? They're always like some kind of outsider, a disfigured or poor vagrant, a wandering merchant who is transiently involved in the community but never is like a permanent staple, passing through as quickly as the shadows of the forest. And I just find that really lovely, just to kind of note that, much as a tiger is always present in the mythology, but never socially a committed member of the society, these people themselves, it's always these foreigners or these travelers and merchants who are not always staying in the village, but they do pass through it that get associated with them as well. A little bit on Myanmar, Thailand, and Cambodia. Our source here comes to us from Francesco Brigenti's contribution, Tantrism and the Weretiger Lore of Burma, Thailand, and Cambodia, in the scholarly anthology Tantra, Magic, and Vernacular Religions of Monsoon Asia, Texts, Practices, and Practitioners from the Margins. He considers the Indo-Burmese border region, where various tribal communities, including the Garo, Karbi, Kachin, Naga, and several Kikichin Mizo clans, are host to an incredible amount of diverse and rich Weretiger traditions. This term, Weretiger, is of course already seen and understood in a number of different ways, very similar to what we've already looked at, right? So we have one, a supernatural being or spirit belonging to a race of shape-shifting tiger people whose attitudes towards humanity tend to be negative. We have the tiger familiar of a shaman or a warrior or some other kind of religious specialist who themselves, transforms using the spirit. And then we have the physical or spiritual transformations undergone by living or dead people, often against their will. So he gives us another lovely list of features of Weretiger motifs. And I love my lists. So we're going to go through. Right? So these are derived from Khmer folktales based in Cambodia and the Kord Plateau region of eastern Thailand. So first we have Weretigers originating from wicked, bewitched women, very less frequently a man, it's usually women, who is unaware of the circumstances of the transformation. So she is frequently a victim of a sorcerer who prompts her to anoint herself with a magical oil, which causes the transformation. Next, we have that the magical oil itself can be prepared by a magician. It will be activated by mantras. It causes the woman to lose her reason. She will run into the forest, join tigers, grow fur, and after 7 days, fully become a tigress herself. The magical method used to restore her to the human form would basically, according to all the sources, consist of hitting the tiger 3 times with a stick provided with a hook. And this action must be accompanied by love charm mantras. So the man performing the exorcism might even be a specialist in love charms who otherwise would make love medicine, which I find interesting, kind of like you're seducing her back to her human nature.
Mm-hmm. Very like, whatchamacallit, Princess and the Frog, I guess.
Yeah, it is quite, yeah.
Or like where the love of the male like hero of the story will be like, yes, it has overcome the curse of the female, It'd be like kind of, I guess, knight in shining armor would be a better metaphor, but
yeah. And there's actually some identical beliefs, possibly of Khmer origin, reported from the Lao-inhabited Korat Plateau, or eastern region of Thailand, in which we hear of a 7-day purification with lustral water, accompanied by prayers of Theravada monks, in order to exorcise a Lao weretigress. So again, you have this purification exorcism, but then you also have, the love medicine that we saw earlier. So suspected weretigers who escaped the exorcism were identified by their frantic glance, their shining bloodshot eyes, and their indecent rude behavior, like kind of classic spirit possession phenomena. Some can no longer speak, they instead only growl like wild beasts, and others take off their clothes and run the countryside naked, making obscene gestures to members of the opposite sex, displaying sexual abandon, again, just kind of linking with being a beast. And turning someone into a tiger can also be done with the aid of magic filters and potions, which was even considered to be a legal threat to Cambodian society, being prosecuted by the King's Court in Legal Code of 1723. So this was actually a real problem. One great source that Briganti cites actually is an oral ancient Khmer folktale first published at the end of the 19th century, and it names a hybrid Sanskrit Pali Khmer expression, meaning the recitation of magical formulas for changing one's body, as the name of the technique for shapeshifting. So the story itself is about a power-seeking Khmer king who traveled with his court to India to learn how to actually shapeshift into animals, giants, and other supernatural creatures from an Acharya or a spiritual teacher. And after learning these mystical arts with his retinue, he and his court go to the jungle, and at one point they run out of provisions. And they're like, you know what? We just spent all this time learning how to shapeshift. Let's shapeshift and at last catch some prey. And they collectively bond together. It's like some kind of Dragon Ball Z fusion dance, and they become the Tiger King. So that's our
Tiger King.
That's Tiger. Yeah.
All of the characters of Tiger King fusion dance into one early pandemic lockdown vibe.
Yeah.
And
Joe
exercise the disease,
Carol Baskin, they all come together and they become one tiger, one mega tiger. So not many tigers, they're one, like a Gundam. Or like Omnimon from the Digimon movie. It's poured into my retinas because I watched it on VHS while I was learning English. Like that's how I learned English, was I was watching VHS tapes and playing like really old school like video games and that didn't have a translation into Serbian. So that's how I went about it. But anyway, they basically succeed in catching their prey, but now they have a new catch, which is they have a tiger's instincts. So they completely forget about their kingdom, that they're supposed to go back and be a Khmer king and his retinue, and they're unable to divide back into people, so they remain in diffused form forever. And that was how the first tiger was born.
The first thing they said, they're great.
Yeah. The very first tiger himself, Mr. Tony.
Mm-hmm. One of the coolest ways for a kingdom to end, at least.
Yeah, literally.
It's like, where's the king? Where's the court? I don't know. They became a super tiger.
Yeah. One of my favorite examples, by the way, from this chapter is that an account of ritual tantric practices of the oil which triggers the transformation. So Briganti says that there's some of the ancient southern, like Indian lower castes, such as the Panan and Parian of Tamil Nadu, practiced a form of magic known as oti, meaning sorcery, but literally translating to break or destroy an enemy, which is a total key moment. I'm just saying, like breaking and destroying enemies. It's very, very the stuff that you get up to on a Saturday night. And this was practiced by low-caste sorcerers following the Nili, particularly ferocious and destructive goddess. They make a baby oil out of human fetuses, smoked over a fire, along with a powdered human skull plus many other ingredients, and this is then applied to the skin to allow the sorcerer to take the shape of any animal he wishes, including most commonly a tiger.
I like the parallels to like Thai Naman Prai.
Yeah, absolutely. As soon as you get fetus oils, right, we always think of like Naman Prai, but it doesn't have to be made out of a fetus, but definitely will contain, if it's Prai, it will contain human parts. The prevalence of were-tigresses, especially in this folklore, follow very similar themes to what we saw in China. So it's this association between the female sex and lust, the ability to seduce and devour men, male anxiety over being devoured and overpowered, and so on. So in Thailand and Myanmar, there are numerous stories of these like very seductive were-tigresses who seduce hunters deep into the woods, and then they kill and devour them after changing shape. So for Thai myths specifically, Briganti cites these three definitions of were-tiger from an official, or rather the official, Thai dictionary published in 1950. So number one is a tiger who originally was a human, struck with, with great black magical skills that they were capable of, and this enabled them to shapeshift. Number two is a tiger who devoured so many people that he has become possessed by the souls of his human prey and therefore can shapeshift back into a human. And this links them back to that whole example of a tiger village, right? Tigers who become people to enter their affairs. In this case, he ate a lot of people, was possessed by their souls, and was able to gain a human form out of devouring them. Which, as a quick aside, very true. I've met many a spirit who absolutely the only reason they could wear a human suit and look like a human and talk like a human was because they've eaten a lot of ghosts.
Mm-hmm.
And the final definition is someone with a high rank and nobility, such as a king, a city governor, or an administrative officer. So this shows us the kind of prestige of a Weretiger title because of tigers being associated with power. And among the Shan Highlanders of northwestern Thailand, there are two main kinds of supernatural phenomena that explain how a human can shapeshift into a were animal. The first is by hosting or being possessed by a witch spirit or a type of hereditary inherited familiar that makes it possible for their hosts to have a spirit double that can leave the body and turn into animals, especially tigers. And secondly, by mastering secret tantric techniques of theranthropic transformation, learned through the teachings of an incredibly potent Buddhist hermit or Lersi. Briganti gives us an account of one of the methods of the latter form, which according to various oral traditions was taught to people either by a spiritual master or by the Great White Spirit, whose identity may well possibly be an ancestral white tiger. So the procedure is something like this. The master tattoos the appropriate yantra onto the initiate's shoulder. The initiate then undresses and recites the mantras etched into the yantra while sitting in the samadhi pose. As the knowledge gradually arises in him, he begins to shake violently and thrash left to right. He gives his clothes to a trusted companion, who then hides the clothes, as well as himself, in a nearby tree, because you do not want to be around when this guy becomes a tiger. He then must make a circle with his own urine and throw himself fully naked into the ground, rolling from side to side. And shortly thereafter, he'll become a tiger. This reminds me of our previous example of, I am going for a walk. But in this case, I'm going to pee in a circle.
There's some cool videos of very similar things, by the way, on YouTube and Facebook going around in Thai language groups of these like kind of tiger possessions at the hands of Lersi hermits. Mm-hmm. Definitely link some of those with the episode.
Yeah, absolutely. So this guy, right? If you've done this, he then goes hunting in the forest, and he brings the slain animals that he's hunted back in his mouth, dropping them off in the piss circle. And his companion, who is now out of hiding, should throw the clothes back into the circle while remaining protected by his own incantations and still kind of hiding behind the tree wherever he is. So as soon as the Weretiger sees his own clothes, he'll be forced to become human again. And practitioners of his art, unlike the other examples that we have seen, can and do control their consciousness and will not kill people or their livestock, only wild animals. They'll protect people walking through the forest so they are not harmed, and especially Buddhist monks who come to practice their art in the forest. Like these are the people that these people will especially protect. And I really like this idea that, even though, they have their consciousness, they're not going to kill people, they're not going to kill livestock, the assistant who has his clothes still has to hide, just to be safe.
Not to get hit by the piss stream being
being ejected out of the sky. We'll get into some blasts. We'll make sure quite shortly. One note on tattooing tiger yawns actually is that this became a widespread practice across Thai-speaking peoples. We're definitely going to do a future episode on tattooing and hopefully bring a good friend of ours on who's studying Thai as a language as well as apprenticing under Nadran right now to learn how to tattoo yawns.
Mm-hmm. They're really hoping we can rope him into this.
Mm-hmm. Finally, with regards to Myanmar in the Burmese context, while little is known about their beliefs about weretigers due to their extreme rarity, it is generally assumed that the ability of a magician to become a tiger is made possible by his knowledge of magic, just as in the case of the Khmer, Thai, and Shan lore we just explored. So the terms for weretiger in Lower Burma translate literally to like man flesh eat tiger, or just man tiger, or man turned into tiger by black magic. And while almost nothing is known about the ritual proceedings, which would actually initiate somebody into becoming a tiger, we do actually have one account coming to us from Maung Tin Aung, the first rector of Rangoon University after independence. He wrote in 1969 that he was abducted in his youth in 1916 by the headman of a village in the Pakoku district to be initiated into the cult of the Weretiger. The headman carried him off into the forest at night, where he met a group of other initiates, who together sacrificed pigs and fowls to the spirits of the forest who protect tigers. And then they would get drunk, they would dance, they sang the invocations of the tigermen. The men then all poured a few drops of their own blood into the pot, where they made their sacrifices and had the child drink it. However, the pot fell on the ground, and it broke into pieces, and due to this bad omen, Ong's initiation into the Weretiger coven failed. He ran away and witnessed the others go down all fours, growl, roar, and crawl, but he did not see them physically transform due to the darkness. And I just really like this story of this kind of aborted initiation.
Reminds me of some of the Toadman initiations that we spoke about in one of the previous episodes, where it would be almost a kidnapping by older members followed by a dinner and a party.
Yeah, absolutely. So finally, we get to Patrick Ewing's book, How We All Began. There's a lot of chapters that's all about Weretigers, but we're going to primarily focus on the Indian context here, since we've already spoken a little bit about China and Southeast Asia. He observes that throughout his studies in Asia, a recurring motif is that tigers have spirits who may have even been siblings with people, though this relationship is now greatly estranged. And if a tiger is disrespected or killed, its spirit would pursue and haunt those who offended him without end, unless they were placated and properly apologized to. And I really have to think back to the Master of the Wolves traditions in the Balkans, because we have this practice, right, in some of our traditional villages of giving wolves peace offerings during the winter months in the Balkans, especially during the wolf holidays. And, in many places throughout East Asia, it's traditional to pay tigers off with a wild boar or a crop raiding deer at the edge of the boundary of the forest to attract them, to placate them, and to persuade them to help get rid of other crop raiders. And this is much in the same way in the Balkans, where you'd leave the first lamb, offered in November at the village boundary as an offering to the wolves. If you ever killed a wolf by accident, you would have to apologize to him. His corpse would be taken to every house, and he would get adorned and anointed with gifts and everything, and be given alcohol and meat, and just apologize to, so that the spirits of his brothers don't come and attack you. There's a number of different origin stories as to the relationship, by the way, between these tigers and people. So from Java, cited by American anthropologist Robert Wessing, we have the following story.
Tigers and people once lived under the same roof in civilized vegetarian harmony, until one day the man preparing lunch cut himself and accidentally garnished it with a few drops of blood. The tigers liked the taste so much that they went on their own way, flesh-eating wild animals.
Blood turning one civilized always makes me think of links between witchcraft and cannibalism, and why witches are often blood drinkers and flesh eaters and so on. In Aceh, in northern Sumatra, a Gayo man once told Wessing that
long ago, a man was making love to his wife in a hut in a rice paddy one afternoon and heard footsteps approaching. So he hastily withdrew from his wife, but ejaculated, just nutted, blasted prolific ropes.
I like the idea that this is the Gaia man talking to Wessing, who said these things. He just blasted absolute ropes.
So some of his semen landed on the floor where it grew into the first cat. And some of these launched ropes went all the way out of the house, out the doorway, and onto the ground, where it became the first tiger. So it is the cat that's fated to live inside, and the tiger that's fated to live outside its father's home.
Imagine being a level 9000 semen retention wizard in eternal Yabumi with your hot wife in your hut, and the mere fact that you busted your nut outside results in several animals spontaneously coming into being. I want to meet this guy. I don't want to be around him, but I do want to meet him at a distance. There's actually many versions of this tale, by the way. In some stories, this man's name was Sayyidina Ali, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him's son-in-law, and a major symbol of strength in Islam, typically associated with the lion. Some of his semen actually shot so far in this story. So there's the cat, in the house. Some goes outside, becomes a tiger, and some shoots so far that it goes to the nearest river and becomes the first crocodile.
He's a real one.
He's a real one. Gentlemen. You know, you're not a real wizard unless you can do this. I think it's worth noting that the tiger and crocodile both are associated with Shiva. So this might be a Hindu tale before Islam supplanted Hinduism as like the main Malay religion in the 16th century. But oh, we are not done yet. There are so many other stories like this, including ones in which the same Sayyidina Ali falls asleep on a rock that has a vulva-shaped groove, and he has a wet dream, ejaculates into the groove, and from it emerges a very large boy. And I wasn't even gonna take a pause there to like, but you know what? Yeah, it's good. He feared that he was a young giant, and so people bullied him. They thrashed him with sticks until he went into all fours, and the scars rather became stripes, and he became the first tiger. God, there's something about those vulva-shaped grooves. Like, have you ever been online and like on Tumblr or on Reddit, like you'll just see these like vulva-shaped canyons and caves and fruits and people just posting them as like mood boards. And it's just like the power of women, just like this is the power of a man, to be honest. Like,
the animated gif of someone pouring honey onto like a peach versus this guy pouring semen onto a rock and birthing tigers as a species. Like
birthing a giant boy. That boy too big. He ain't right. And then he becomes a tiger. Yeah, I love it. Absolutely. A non-semen involving story is that of an old man taking in a very strange boy from the forest. And this guy has white skin, green eyes, and very long nails. And he adopts him and he names him Muhammad the Orphan. At school, Muhammad the Orphan was so disruptive that his teacher beat him with a cane. And the first blow, he yelps and he leaps across the doorway. At the second blow, he leaps to the ground below. At the third, he leaps into the grass. At the fourth, he begins to growl. At the fifth, now he has all these stripes. He's scarred with them. He grows a tail and he goes on all fours. And his teacher now cries,
"This is of a truth God's tiger,"
and banishes him into the forest fringes. I'm sorry, the spy kid's like, Mr. Electric,
Send him to the wilderness now.
Yeah, literally, this man is a tiger. Send him to the wilderness. And he is indeed banished into the fringes of the forest.
That sounds like a good day at school growing up.
Yeah.
So there's a really good mental image there with the teacher chasing him out of the school as well.
Yeah, he doesn't stop when he leaves the school. Like he follows him like straight up into like the grass and everything. There are many other such origin stories along the lines of like the tiger was originally a boy that was a little strange and he got beaten. There's also those of a mother raising a tiger and a human son, and then these brothers come into conflicts, eventually resulting in a tiger being banished into the forest. So in these ways, man becomes the ruler of civilization and tiger becomes the ruler of the wilderness, especially its fringes, these liminal boundaries between what is truly wild and then what is like the market and cities of man. And it's literally these places, right, these borderlands where conflicts can arise. And this is also why shamans who cross these hedges and link ancestors to non-human spirits are able to become tigers themselves. Naturally, from this arise spirits and gods who patron tigers and are tigers themselves. One deity especially revered in the Ganges Delta region of the Sundarbans in India and Bangladesh is Dakshin Ray, whose name means king of the south. Conflicts between people and tigers still occur here, where tigers do indeed attack various villagers, and they are often understood as being man-eating shapeshifters on the prowl for blood. In some cases, those killed and eaten are considered to not have made enough offerings towards himself and his consort Bonnebibi, or that they abused the privileges granted by these gods. These tigers and weretigers are even thought to be so cunning that they will synchronize their footsteps with the chops of woodcutters' axes before striking. Not to make everything about the Master Duels, but something I found especially intriguing about Dakshin Ray was that he is worshipped by all of those who enter the Sundarban forests, regardless of caste, creed, or religion. So anyone can propitiate him for safety and pay respect to his command over our nature, much like our very own Gospodar Vukova. Other gods who require similar propitiation include Dakthe among the Hmong peoples, the Great Van of Manchuria, the Wagoba of the Warli people, Bugdev of the Gonds, and many more. And they are, they're placated, they're offered to, generally understood as sending tigers to kill as punishment, rather than the tigers acting in this way being proof that the appeasements aren't working. So similarly, even the name tiger should not be easily invoked. Even speaking the word out loud can conjure a sleeping tiger to hunch down and find you. Just bam, another Master Rules moment, like don't say vuk or wolf out loud. It can summon the wolves. And of course, it's not just tigers that use people, right? People use tigers, especially for magic and medicine. So whiskers can be burnt as incense to ward off evil spirits and ill fortune. This can also prevent the person who killed a tiger from being transformed into one post-mortem by being possessed by that same tiger spirit. The liver can be eaten for courage. The clavicle bones are kept for protection and for female fertility, as well as the tiger's nose. Burnt tiger flesh promotes crop fertility. Tiger fat protects cattle from disease. Some even feed their elephants pieces of tiger liver to make them more courageous, as well as the eyes of a living owl torn directly from the bird to make them see better in the dark. There's actually a citation here of Major General James Elliott as witnessing a case in which an Indian elephant disgraced itself by bolting when it was only slightly mauled by a tiger being shot dead by its feet. It's like, oh, what a coward you are, completely disgracing yourself running away when a tiger only slightly mauled you and then you saw it get shot. But that evening it was rubbed all over by the tiger's fat, and its nerve apparently never failed again. So, it was only a flesh wound after all. I think it's very important to note that much as it is with werewolves in Europe and witches in general, people could be very easily accused of being a weretiger if they were in any way seen as antisocial or suspicious, or even just very fortunate, like, having, why are you so lucky? Why do you have so much wealth? Well, it's because of sorcery and vampirism. And of course, women, especially childless old women and widows, were frequent targets of these accusations, being hunted down and lynched if accused, and other times being subjected to tests to prove their innocence, such as plunging their hands in boiling oil or ghee, and if burned, she was guilty. And this is, of course, a way to test spirit possession in many traditions, putting your hand in burning oil. And some women indeed passed these tests, attributing their anti-pain trance states to the worship of their mother goddess. There's actually an interesting gender divide here, because it seems that while the majority of the physical shapeshifters in India are men, the spiritual shapeshifters are actually tending to be largely women. Meaning, essentially, the stories of weretigers physically assuming tiger form typically inform men, but the exception is witches, especially the Chetipes, meaning prostitutes, in the region around the Godavari River in India in the south. Part succubus, part vampire, part weretigers. They can be born of women dying a natural death, such as childbirth or suicide, or be initiated as living women who from then are considered partially dead themselves. So Newman tells us of one of the main animals which is shapeshift into both spiritually and physically across India is the tiger. Most initiations are, as in most global cases, solitary and involuntary, with the witch learning her craft from her tutelary spirits and the goddess in her dreams, especially in the fortnight following Diwali, which was itself thought to be the time that witches were most powerful. And they would dance naked all night while entranced under the darkness of the new moon. There are stories of such women later prostrating themselves before images of their chosen goddess, such as Durga or Kali, promising offerings of human blood, and then shapeshifting into a rat, worm, cat, tiger, and so on to vampirize men and take their blood. The victim would be continually drained over time and then would die, and his body would not burn if cremated. Rather, his spirit would follow the witch as a new familiar. And she may then even return to the grave of her victim 3 times, bringing oil lamps and small pots of food, water, and oil, and then ply the cadaver with these offerings until it rose again and began to moan. At this moment, with the spirit and body joined once more, she would behead the corpse, drink its blood, and then run back to her goddess's shrine to vomit the blood all over again and perform a dance to her. Absolute queen. Real girl boss hours. As I mentioned, Godavari witches are referred to as prostitutes because of their vampiric nature of their seductions, and prostitutes themselves were often accused of being these kinds of witches. Some were thought to ride around on tigers, enter men's homes, and very sexily, very seductively suck all the blood out of their big toe. Oh yes, we're back to toes.
Oh yeah. There's something about these particular witches from the Godavari district that pings a lot of vampire omens that I'm familiar with in, especially southwestern United States, Mexico, Central and South America, the Philippines, and then also Poland, interestingly. But, the idea of these witches, vomiting the blood after the transformation being a big one, but also even the toe thing going on.
Very Lechuza.
Yeah, very Lechuza, very owl-aligned vampire as a way in which they can leave their bodies.
Yeah.
And one of the locations through which they do so. There's actually a really interesting example of this that I saw, with a similar type of owl-aligned vampire in Poland, where the grave was found with a sickle impaled into the coffin above the neck of this woman, but also equally, if not more so importantly, for keeping her constrained after death to the grave, is a padlock that was shackled around the big toe.
So is this a Striga?
Yes, this is a Striga.
Yeah, okay, so there you go. The foot must be shackled, the peds must be sealed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's also the story of the Manananggal, which is a type of kind of vampiric witch spirit in the Philippines. There was an interesting example that actually made global news in 1992, where in the Tondo district of Manila was terrorized by one of these spirits rampaging and on the loose. To the point that people were saying every morning, oh, they visited the house of this person. And the person would leave the house with like wounds and injuries on their bodies, being like, the witch was here, she attacked me. And the situation escalated until a group of young men, accompanied by a television crew, went on a literal witch hunt and barged into the home of an elderly woman in the area to investigate the rumors that she was in fact this vampiric witch. And the understandably terrified woman, trying to explain that she was not this spirit, made the mistake of showing her toes severed from her feet as like, see, I was the victim of this. But who was described by the news as a vampire expert who was with a group of men was like, this is actually proof that you are the vampire because your toes are how you leave your body.
And very Lechuza, yeah, very Striga.
So, and it also is highlighting the, they drink the blood from that site as well in her defense. Interestingly, she was absolved very quickly when the reporter who was with them produced the dried tail of a stingray, which is a talisman that's very potent against these spirits, and said, if you're not the witch, just touch this on camera and we can all go home. And she did. So, luckily she got away. But yeah, very, very Lechuza, very Striga, very all the fun, owl witch ladies who chop off their toes to go bump in the night.
I love that they were like, it's kind of anticlimactic. They were like, oh, okay, yeah, you can touch it. Okay, bye then. Sorry about
that. And that is our report from our feet specialist, Big Toe Key.
Oh no. He just got absolutely renamed.
Oh man. That's one of the problems with this omen is like, this is the very, very real, like, thing that can happen where people will, as you were saying earlier, reveal what type of spiritual things they have going on through where their feet touch the ground.
Yeah.
It's also just a funny omen given, the context of today, and all the sucking on toes memes. But those aside, it is helpful.
Listen, you have no idea how many like sucking on toes memes I had to restrain myself from making. There's like a whole archive of things that didn't make it into my research. That was just gonna be like, I had like whole in my notes. I had like whole like pictures of like random disgusting memes of this nature because I'm just my brain is broken. But I think it's worth noting too that in Lechuza, like in Mexico, for example, just all just accusations of diabetic women as being the vampire because they're missing their toes and so on. It's this constant. It's a motif, right? Just like having like two sets of teeth or just two sets of hearts. In the case of the Striga in the Balkans as well as in Poland. The toe is such a way to leave the spirit, right? It's such a as we lose heat through the feet, we also lose spirit, and so it's a way to transgress, but also like, what's a good way to jinx someone, or hex someone is to hotfoot them or put something on their feet, like make them step on something. Pro tip for all you sorcerers, put money on the ground where your powder is that you want someone to like stand and pick up. So that's a good way to put it up the feet. I think my personal favorite form that these witches take, by the way, out of all of these examples, is that of a tiger with one very sexy human leg. They would stick out the bushes like a Venus flytrap. And then, I just like imagine a tiger, right? Just chilling. And then one leg perfectly shaven for some reason. Like, she's got her nair, she waxed it, looking absolutely shiny, silky soft, just at the bushes. And a horny man walks by and is like, awooga, and he just goes in there and gets mauled. Like there's something about that, like just the one leg that just got me. Like I don't know, like
it's good. It's a good image.
I just love these stories so much. But there you have it. Newman's book, very detailed, hundreds of these anecdotes from the countries he surveys. There's like many chapters. I highly encourage you to read it if you like these stories and you want to hear all the ones we didn't include, and also learn more about the socio-historical context of frankly dwindling tiger populations and their relationships with people in all these field reports, as well as travelogues and how adventure novels from tourists and wealthy Europeans, especially travelers with all these like true embellished stories, came to haunt their home countries, especially England, with examples of these sensationalist tales of shape-shifting cannibals, which is ironic given the abundance of shape-shifting cannibals in Europe. You don't have to go to India to find these. But I wanted to leave off with one more anecdote from this book, which I was particularly taken back, which I feel like touches on a lot of these themes. Ananta Krishna Iyer recorded 2 shape-shifting prescriptions issued by villains. So these are how to actually shapeshift, right? So one is take the head of a dog and burn it and plant it on a Velakuti plant. Burn camphor and frankincense and adore it. Then pluck the root, mix it with the milk of a dog and the bones of a cat. A mark made with the mixture on the forehead will enable any person to assume the figure of any animal he thinks of. The other is before a stick of the malankara plant, which is the emetic nut tree, Catanarachum spinosa is the Latin. Worship it with a lighted wick and incense. Then chant the Shakti, mantram 101 times, and mutter the mantram to give life at the bottom. Watch carefully which way the stick inclines. Proceed to the south of the stick and pluck the whiskers of a live tiger, and make with them a ball of the Verali silk, as used to cover the Keralan warriors killed fighting heroically. String it with silk and enclose it with a neir. Stand on the palms of the hand to attain the disguise of a tiger, and with a stick in hand, think of a cat, white bull, or other animal, and then you will in the eyes of others appear as such. I like to hear the note that, it's in the eyes of others, but also plucking the whiskers of a live tiger, says, our author, sounds about as easy as milking a tigress. But here's the anecdote. I just want to give you like these 2 examples of other like recipes for becoming a weretiger or shapeshifting into animals in general. And here is a tiny little anecdote which I just really liked. In 1957, Powell reported a version of the irreversible transformation yarn told to him by 2 old shikari friends in Balagat, one a Baiga and the other a Gond. To slay a real man-eater in the neighborhood, they said, a banyan or a moneylender transformed himself into a tiger by swallowing a powder given to him by his sadhu for the task. This is like a holy man. Sadly, he entrusted the antidote to his pretty young wife, and after killing and eating her, he became the most dreaded man-eater in all of human memory, claiming thousands of lives. And I think this just wraps up so many of the themes, right? Like the victim being the woman because she's available and nearby, right? It was the wife who had the antidote, and being unable to transform back. Now his mind is not able to control the form, being fully committed to the tiger persona, and then being compelled to eat human flesh, right? It's specifically human flesh that has this, property that draws the tiger spirit to hunt and consume it. So there you have it. That's some of the research I went about on making this episode. Thank you guys for joining me. And I wanted to pass it off to you. What are some of your thoughts on these stories, other than toes are tasty?
Gonna have to absolve myself of that reputation if it falls upon me.
Oh, the big toki. Yeah, don't worry. Don't worry. Just because you're an owl witch doesn't mean that we're gonna start chopping your toes.
Yeah. Fears that I think will be absolved with a future episode about a very funny man. But there's some interesting thoughts. First and foremost, thank you for doing all that research.
Of course,
And,
yeah, my pleasure.
sharing it with us. And one of the things that struck me at the end was, another gymnastic move involved in the transformation of the tiger, but as well coupled with, other animal kind of sacrifices. Like take the head of a dog and the bone of a cat, both of which are, famously grotesque animal sacrifice rituals that grant the ability to shapeshift. And similar powers, so it's just kind of interesting to see a crossover there. But one of the motifs that I thought was kind of interesting, especially with the Weretigresses, was that came up in a couple of these examples, were their clothing itself almost being offered to the particular deity that grants them the boon in that way. So in one of the earliest examples where the woman was hiding behind the shrine of the deity and the clothes were left on the altar, or like the clothes are given to an assistant, or in that way, it's almost like offering a very human skin in some ways, to gain a new one. There's something there.
Absolutely.
I guess is what I'm thinking, which
Definitely. I think the connection with family and like filial piety in China, and later on, the family seems very involved in all of these stories,
either as victims or as assistants.
Yeah, exactly. Like there seems to be a lot of interaction with them that you don't always see in these kinds of myths. I mean, sometimes you do, of course, but here it seems to be especially common. I find that quite fascinating personally.
I wish I could find a link to it. On YouTube, there's a trailer for a movie called Weretiger. It's a literally, if you I'll put it in the show notes for our patrons, but like if you just Google it, it's Weretiger official trailer, a Myanmar movie with English subtitles. Like that's literally the full YouTube listing, and it's very cheesy and cute, but you can see some of these very motifs play out in just the scenes. Definitely recommend checking that out. Is there anything that we have left? Yeah, our Akashic record of the day. What I listen to music wise while drafting this episode is The Rabbit That Hunts Tigers by Yin Yin. One of my very close friends owns this on vinyl, so shout outs to him, a fellow Balkan witch.
Very jealous of his pickup of that album.
I know.
That is a good find.
That is a good find, yeah.
That is definitely the album of this episode.
It is indeed.
Check that out.
It's the score is completely in my head right now. But there you have it. Thank you guys so much. And with that, I'll leave it to you, Key, to give us the license to depart.
So today's license to depart comes to you from Welcome MS 2000, which is published as Clavis Inferni by Stephen Skinner and David Rankine. So this is the Banishment of Demons, selected because, of course, shape-shifting cat people tying into the black cat bone and cat magic. So we went right for the Cyprian Grimoires. All right, your license is as follows. Hear my words, obey me, and be accustomed to fulfill my wish, spirit. Go now back again to your place where you were before I called you here, until I, God willing, call you again. Be always ready to come when called, and by the name of the living and true and invisible God, most dreadful and strong, and I may, from the law of his majesty, receive and take away from you the treasure asked for in the aforesaid summoning. Go now most peacefully to your place without murmur, tumult, and without injury to us and the circle or to other men. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.